Hey, what's going on, guys? So today I'm going to be talking about all the new operator arcanes that we got with Fortuna. And for anybody who's not aware, you get these arcanes through the Vox Solaris reputation, which is after the Solaris United reputation, which means that these arcanes are locked behind a pretty hefty reputation grind. Although, unlike the Quill's arcanes, these arcanes come fully built just like the Kick Gun arcanes, so you're not going to have to go and farm resources in order to build them. They're going to come pre-built, and you'll need 10 of each to get to rank 3. Which means that if you want one of each of these fully built arcanes, it's going to cost you about 1.3 million reputation. Which with my MR took me about 50 days to get a fully built set of all of them, because I didn't buy any of them except for an extra set of Magus Lockdown that I'll talk about later. Not that it's super necessary for you to know how long it's going to take, because I think a lot of these arcanes are not worth picking up, especially for the time investment. However, there are a few that I recommend picking up, and I'll be sure to point them out. For this video, I'm going to be dividing the arcanes into two different types. The Magus, which are the operator arcanes, and then the Virtuos, I think is how you pronounce it. I just always call them Virtuous, which are the amp arcanes. But since there are more Magus arcanes, let's start out with those. And quickly before we start, I just want to mention that you can equip 2 Magus arcanes on your operator at any given time, meaning that you can have 2 of the same Magus arcane, or 1 Magus arcane of one type and 1 Magus arcane of another type. Sometimes the effect from an arcane will be able to stack twice when you equip 2 of these, and I'll try to point that out when it's relevant. But let's start out with Magus Anomaly. This is a pretty simple arcane. Whenever you transfer back into your Warframe from your operator, enemies will be pulled towards your Warframe's new location. At max rank, this occurs in a 20 meter radius, and the enemies themselves are pulled about 5 meters according to the wiki. This offers you a little bit of crowd control and allows you to move enemies where you want them to. Overall, I'd say this is an okay arcane, certainly not something that I'd recommend as a top tier. Next up, we have Magus Accelerant and Magus Deconstruct. Both of these arcanes work the same way, which is on Void Blast, you permanently debuff the enemy to take 50% increased damage of the given type. If you don't know what Void Blast is, it's this attack, which is basically the operator melee. This effect can stack up to twice for 100% increased damage. And I suspect you can actually equip 2 of these Magus arcanes to increase it to 100% on 1 Void Blast. Although the wiki doesn't mention whether or not that works, and honestly I wouldn't really recommend buying 2 of these arcanes. Because to be clear, this doesn't actually reduce enemy resistances, it just increases your own damage. Which means that this arcane won't cause your damage to ignore armor, which is really the point of weakness and resistances. And if you want to know more about that, I'll leave a link to my video about weakness and resistances above. So because this doesn't actually work for resistances, these arcanes are not very good. Although for my limited testing, this does appear to be an extra multiplier on top of the other multipliers that you have. So if you're using Rhino with Roar, this will then further increase that damage. Although, again, I would not recommend running this arcane. Next up, we have Magus Lockdown, which is quite possibly the best arcane in the entire game. What this arcane does is that whenever you dash to a point, if there are enemies within a 12 meter range around it, it will stun those enemies and then deal 60% of their total health as puncture damage. And with this arcane, you're also able to equip 2 at the same time, so you can put 2 mines down on every single void dash for 120% of their health as puncture damage, which if they don't have armor is going to kill them immediately. And if you're running a focus school like Naramon, then you'll be able to void dash so long as there's 3 targets around. Because Surging Dash will increase your area to 12 meters, and then for every target you hit with your void dash, you refund 10 energy. So if you hit up to 3 targets, because void dash only costs 25 energy, you're refunding 100% of the energy that you spent on void dashing, which means you can just do it over and over and over again. Although one of the most recent patches changed how void dash worked, because originally you could just dash over and over again into the ground and hit targets around you, but now the void dash actually has to move the operator in order for it to count as an actual dash or something. I'm not entirely sure how they changed this, but basically you just need to make sure that your operator is moving forward in order for it to count as a void dash, which is why things like round procking with Virtuous Shadow no longer work. They just changed how void dash worked to stop the interaction between Magus Lockdown and Magus Revert, which people were abusing to take down Eidolon shields immediately. Anyways, let's get back to Magus Lockdown. If you have 2 of these equipped, you can basically kill any enemy in the game by void dashing at them once with your operator. Magus Lockdown is affected by armor and shields though, so if they have armor or shields, you'll need to remove those first before being able to do so. But if you're running with a squad of corrosive projections against something like Grenier, you'll be able to kill all the enemies in 1 void dash with your operator, which is ridiculous. They could literally be level 1,000,000 and you would still be able to kill them in 1 void dash. This does have a couple notable weaknesses against Corpus as well as Infested. The Corpus take less damage because they have shields, and the shields don't count towards the health damage from the arcane, as well as the fact that shields are inherently resistant to puncture damage, whereas none of the health types actually have resistances to puncture. And then the Infested Ancients can also prevent you from dealing large amounts of puncture damage. Although overall, this arcane is still amazing, and I'd still recommend picking one up. Because not only will it temporarily stun enemies, it'll also scale to infinity, which just makes this arcane insane. And since I was just talking about Magus Revert, let's talk about it now. Magus Revert allows you to go back to your starting position when you void dash. So you can see here when I void dash, I have a little buff in the top right hand corner of the screen that says Magus Revert. And then when I activate Void Dash again while I have this buff, it'll take me back to the position where I started at. It'll also heal your operator for 40 health, which is a pretty crappy secondary effect, especially since the only real consequence of your operator dying is transference static, which if you're asking what's transference static is probably the appropriate response to that because most people just ignore it. When they originally released Magus Revert, it didn't have a 3-second cooldown, but now that it does, it's far less useful than it used to be. And considering that Magus Lockdown was really the reason that this was nerfed, I don't really see a reason to run this arcane anymore. You're only going to be able to heal every 3 seconds, and honestly, it's just annoying to use in regular gameplay. But there could still be a niche use that I'm not seeing, although I don't think it's worth the rep. Next up, we have Magus Glitch, which is an arcane that negates transference static. Transference static is the debuff that you get when your operator dies. What this does is that it removes 100% of your Warframe shields and then 10% of their total health. This debuff can stack up to 4 times, which means that if your operator dies 4 times in a row within 45 seconds, you'll lose 40% of your maximum health and your shields will be depleted each time. In practical gameplay, this almost never happens. Your operator might die once or twice, but because you can just crouch and become invisible, it's very hard to kill an operator, making Magus Glitch basically useless. Although for whatever reason you really don't want your shield to be depleted when your operator dies, you can run this, I guess. Certainly not one of my top choices. Next up, we have Magus Firewall. Magus Firewall creates a particle around your operator every 3 seconds, and each of these particles will negate 12.5% damage up to a total of 75% damage with the maximum of 6 particles. These particles don't affect your Warframe, and honestly, the 3-second delay is really long. You have to stay in void mode for 18 seconds in order to get the maximum effect, and even then it'll only last for 40 seconds, and then even then, every single time you get hit, it'll remove one of these, and there's no invincibility frames between getting hit, which means that you can potentially lose all 6 particles at once. I would think of this arcane as like a crappy health conversion for operators, who remember, you can just go invisible on, and they're not going to be taking damage anyways, for the most part. So this arcane feels overall pretty useless to me. Not something I would waste rep on. Next up, we have Magus Drive, which allows you to get 100% extra speed on your K-Drive when you transfer. If you are using K-Drives, this will make you 100% faster, which I guess is useful. If you're not using K-Drives, then you could just ignore this. And it's worth noting that this arcane only stacks once. So you can't equip 2 of these for 200% speed, you can only get the 100% speed from the one. Next up, we have Magus Repair. This is one of my favorite arcanes from Vox Solaris, because while you remain crouched in void mode, it's going to heal all Warframes within 20 meters by 20% every second. This will stack twice, as well as working with any of your teammates' Magus Repairs, so you could all have Magus Repairs on and just remain crouched and heal Warframes immediately, if you really wanted to. Although for me, a single one of these arcanes is more than enough to heal my Warframe, and since it was added to the game, this is my go-to way to heal. This arcane's super good, and I'd recommend picking up a copy if you have the rep. Next up, we have Magus Melt, which gives you an extra 20% heat damage every time you Void Dash. These Void Dashes can stack up to 5 times for an extra 100% heat damage. People use this in conjunction with Volt Shields on the Eidolons to give you radiation damage on your amp, which can allow you to take out Eidolon limbs. I have a video that goes over this, and I'll link to that above. If you wanted to, you could also combine this with Surge to create radiation damage as well. But because the heat damage only works with your operator, I would say this arcane's only okay, and I'd only recommend using it in conjunction with the operator for Eidolons. Although you can use it in normal missions, and it will increase your overall operator damage. Up next, we have Magus Overload, which on Void Blast stuns robotic enemies for 3 seconds, after which it deals 60% of its total health as electricity damage to all enemies within 20 meters. This is a pretty decent arcane, but it only works on robotic enemies, making it not very good overall. It's basically just a worse version of Magus Lockdown. And unlike Magus Lockdown, it can't be stacked multiple times on the same target. So while it's good on paper, it's not very good in practice. But that covers it for the Magus Arcanes. Now let's take a look at the Virtuous Arcanes. First up, we have Surge, which converts 100% of your void damage to electricity damage. This means that by equipping Surge, you're removing all your void damage. Now, if you were to only rank this up to rank 2, you would keep 25% of your void damage while still doing 75% electricity damage. And since operators are largely used for their void damage, it's hard to recommend using something that removes all of it. Although again, like I mentioned, you can combine this with Magus Melt to then create radiation damage if you want to. Spike works the same way as Surge. If you get it to rank 3, then it's going to convert 100% of your void damage into puncture damage. Not the greatest thing in the world, but if you want puncture on your amp, then this is an option. Forge again works the same way, where it's going to convert your void damage into heat damage this time. And then finally, we have Trojan, which converts your damage into viral. Since viral status effect is far better than its damage type, if you build your amp around Trojan, then you're probably going to be going for status chance over damage. Overall, I don't think any of these conversion arcanes are particularly good, but there are some niche circumstances where you can use them, like with using Trojan, to have an enemy's health with the status effect. That covers it for the new Fortuna arcanes. It takes a lot of investment to get to these arcanes, so hopefully this video at least shows you which ones you should be pursuing. Personally, my 2 top recommendations are Lockdown and Repair, and if you're getting Lockdown, you might as well just get 2, because that's a lot of damage. but hopefully after watching this, you'll have a better idea of what you want to get for yourself. That's going to do it for me today, guys. If you found the video helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you leave a like, and make sure you subscribe for future content. Hope you're all having a good one, and I'll see you later.